I'm sitting here daydreaming about owning an early 30s senior classic car. This so happens to be the 1934 Packard V12 convertible Victoria. It's the production body with the flat windshield. The problem is this car, when it was new, was a well excess of $6,000, rich man's car then. And today it's a rich man's car too. It's worth well in excess of $500,000. This car with a V windshield in it, a Dietrich model, would be over $1 million. I can't afford this car, and maybe a lot of you can't either. But there is a car that Packard produced in the early 1930s that is affordable. And I think I've got the answer. This is it, a 1932 Packard 902 Coupe Roadster. Packard made Standard 8s in 1930, 2, 3, and 4. Largely overlooked by the collector market as being that kind of junior sort of Packard. But this car runs and drives like all Packards do. Sure, it's got a smaller engine at 110 horsepower versus the twin 6 at 150 horsepower. But this car is affordable for a lot more of us. And so we are seeing more and more and more of these Standard 8s come into our shop for complete restoration. And that's what this one is here for. We're going to be doing a ground up complete restoration on this car. And we'll be doing paint, body, chrome, top, interior. Everything is going to be done to this car to make it look like and perform like a brand new Packard. But the Packards of the twin 6, especially the V windshield Dietrich Packards, LeBaron Packards and all that, they were a car for the super rich when they were new, and they're a car for the super rich today. But what you and I can afford is maybe one of these Standard 8s. This car, completely restored, is well south of $200,000 when it's all done. If you want to go with a sedan, you can get one all restored, done, ready to go in about the $40,000 to $50,000 range, which is much more affordable. An easy way for somebody to get into the hobby and have a Packard, early 30s Packard to enjoy. They're wonderful cars. This one, we have the opportunity to take it out and drive it before we tear it down for restoration. That's a luxury that doesn't normally happen in my world. So we're going to take this out. We're going to see what it's like on the road, see what the performance is, and then we'll come back, assess what we're going to do underneath the hood and everywhere for parts and all that kind of thing that we need to do the restoration. And we'll be bringing you every aspect of this restoration in videos, hopefully released about once a week once we start in on this restoration. We do have a 1935 Packard Super 8 convertible Victoria under restoration, and for you Packard aficionados, I think you'll enjoy that too, along with the other Auburn Bowtails and Cords and Baby Duesenbergs and Pierce Arrows and all the other things that we got going on around here. If you like our videos, please like and share them. It really helps us out. If you don't like them, give me a comment. We want to put out what you guys want to see, so if we're doing something wrong, we're happy to correct it. So let's get going on the old Packard. I look for a lot of things when I get to take the car out on a test drive before restoration. Of course, you've got all the obvious things like, does the transmission sound good? Is it quiet? Does it shift good? All these kinds of things. Looking for drive shaft issues such as worn out U-joints, all that kind of thing. I'm looking for any rear end noise that I happen to hear, particularly the clunk when you start out and first going forward, reverse going backwards. We're looking for that kind of stuff. We may still end up replacing bearings and that kind of thing when we get in there, just because they may look a little bit suspect. But I'm also looking for squeaks in the body, perhaps some loose wood or something like that. I'm looking for my windshield is nice and tight. I'm looking for the door glass is not rattling and this kind of thing. If we have to do the top alignment of our top bows and all that kind of thing, we certainly want to know it now, and it makes it a lot easier at the end. So there's the usual things I look for. These Packards in 1932 came out with a synchromesh transmission in second and third gear. They used the same transmission in the Standard 8 and the Deluxe 8, they called it, in 1932, and the Twin 6, they called it in 1932. kind of interesting was you could get the 4-speed transmission that they put in the 1931 models as an option in these 1932 models, but I've never seen a 32 with a 31 transmission in it. The 31 transmission was not synchroed, and it had a real granny for first gear. It was a real stump puller. It was almost useless. So why in the world anybody would want that transmission unless they lived up at the top of a mountain or something, I don't know. But Packard was a little bit late to the party. Cadillac had already come out with a synchro transmission before 1930, and their V16, V12, V8s all had synchromesh transmissions, second and third gear. So Packard, being the conservative company that they are, they were a little late to the party on the transmission front. But we want to make sure that those synchros are working real good, both in upshifting and downshifting, and you should be able to just about speed shift a Packard transmission. They should go into gear really quickly and really easily if they're right. And then the whole front end, and that's probably the biggest problem with this car, is the front end of this thing is pretty loose. I've got a left front wheel that's not straight. It's wobbling pretty good. I've got really old tires on this thing, so they're probably flat on one side from sitting too long. So I get this thing up to about 30 miles an hour, and you could feel it almost want to take off on you and shimmy. So I haven't had it over 40 miles an hour. I don't trust it enough driving faster than that because it's really wanting to take off pretty hard at 40 miles an hour. So we're cruising around here mostly in second gear, just trying to get a feel for the car before we tear it down. Another thing that I'm looking for is all of my instruments. Do they work? Do they not work? Do they work properly? I get out my cell phone and I check the speedometer to see how accurate it is with my GPS. And I look at my oil pressure and all of that. Now this car, 1932, had a King Sealy fuel gauge, which was a column of air that is pushed up through a tube, and it comes up here to the dash, and it's got a fluid-filled tube up there, and it goes up and down. The fluid does as far as what your gas level is. They rarely work. If the car sits for any period of time, 6 months to a year, they won't work for a while until the gas sloshes around in the tank for 5 miles or so, and then it'll start pushing a column of air again. The other bad thing about the King Sealy gauges is that the fluid that's in the head here up on the dash was caustic, and it kind of ate up a bunch of components in the back of them, so they're a little tricky to restore. We convert some of them to electric, like our Lincolns that we want to drive. We'd rather have an electric setup in there, and then I know what's in the tank when I'm driving. But this car will go back to original. We'll check the clock and see if it's working. Everything on the dash has to work, of course. Another thing I'm looking for is the steering. These cars are inherently loose in steering. When I say that, I mean old cars. So we want to get them as tight as we possibly can and still make it comfortable to drive. Now, of course, we're also looking for the brakes and how well do they operate. Are they going to pull from one side to the other real bad? And so we're looking for that. Our front end just kind of bouncing around here big time. So I wouldn't want to drive this car very far, and that's why it's probably in for restoration. Is it needs quite a bit of work on its chassis. In 1932, the automotive industry was in desperate straits. Of course, the economy was in a deep depression, and it was still getting worse. In 1931, the automotive industry produced about 2 million cars. And in 1932, they produced about 1.1 million cars. So times were really bad. And for a luxury car company like Packard, who really didn't have a low-price car or even a mid-price car to compete with the likes of Ford and Chevy and all those, and even in the mid-price range of Buick and Oldsmobile and some of these cars, they really felt like they needed to come out with a car to compete with those other cars. So they came out with a Light 8, designated as a 900, and that was their entry into the market so that they could try and penetrate other markets. And that car was slated to be about $2,000. They actually debuted it in the $1,700 range, and they lost money on every one they produced. It was bad. The marketing wasn't right for it. The time wasn't right for it. Everything was wrong, except the car itself, which today is a highly collectible car. I love them. I love the shovel nose look to the front, and they've been nicknamed the shovel nose Packard. They were really a wonderful car, but they just didn't catch on. For $600, a little over $600 more, you could have bought this standard 8 and stepped up into this body. The 900 and the 901, 902 series all shared the same engine, transmission, and rear axle. So it just didn't catch on very well. And then they also had the Deluxe 8. The Deluxe 8 was a Super 8, was the big 8, and they were expensive. This car was about $2,600 and change. It went up in June of 1932, but it debuted at about $2,600. And then the Deluxe 8 was another $1,000 on top of this car. So much more expensive, certainly to buy. The Twin 6 was the other model that they introduced in 1932. And considering the desperate economic times that they had, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe they thought they needed a car to compete with Marmon and Cadillac and Pierce Arrow and Lincoln with all of their V12, so they had to come out with a V12 also. And that car was on a 142 and 147.5-inch wheelbase. That shared the same wheelbase as the 903s, the Super 8s, or in 1932 called the Deluxe 8. And that car cost over $6,000. Depending on what body was on it, it was ranged clear up to over $7,000. So very, very expensive cars for the time. Not only were those cars very difficult to acquire because of the cost of them, but they may be dangerous to drive. In desperate times, people do desperate things, and you may go driving down the road and people are throwing rocks at you because you went and spent $6,000 on a car when they can't even afford a meal. So people were just very cautious in what they were doing during that time period as far as buying a car, even when they could afford it. This model here is a 902. There was a 901 produced on a shorter wheelbase chassis. This is a 136.5-inch wheelbase, 129.5-inch wheelbase. They produced one model, which was a short wheelbase sedan, and all the rest of the body styles for the standard 8s were produced on that 136.5-inch wheelbase. They all shared the same engine, transmission, rear end, front end. All those components were the same. This car, they claim, put out 110 horsepower. We'll find out when we build this motor of what kind of horsepower it really puts out. The 903 Packard, the Deluxe 8, supposedly put out 125 horsepower, and then the Twin 6, it put out about 150 horsepower. I would say driving this car is lighter, more agile, a little bit easier to drive as far as handling is concerned, certainly in parking lots in the garage and that kind of thing. But this car, only putting out that 110 horsepower, I can't keep up with the Deluxe 8s and the Twin 6s that were offered in the line too. The shovel nose Packard and this Packard sharing the same engine, they drove virtually the same. This car weighs 1,000 pounds roughly lighter than the Twin 6. An interesting side note is the Twin 6 has an engine and transmission that weighs around 1,500 pounds, fully dressed. It's a really heavy engine and transmission combination. This engine, I don't know what it weighs. Maybe we'll weigh it when we get to building it. But this car is just light and agile compared to those other cars. But those other cars will pull away on the hills away from this car. It just can't keep up. It just doesn't have the power. I think these cars are having a resurgence of popularity because of cost, and people are discovering that they're pleasant to drive. It's still that Packard feel that you have with any of the more deluxe models, the Deluxe 8 and the Twin 6. This car feels like a Packard. It drives like a Packard. It has a presence on the road. It's got a stature. It's got a sense to it of quality throughout. I've been driving this car around now for about 50 miles, and I hardly have a rattle in it. I've got just a little bit of noise right up here. but compared to some of the other makes out there, this is an absolute dream to drive. So I think people have discovered that yes, even though this is a standard 8, it drives like a Packard. It really is a nice car. And cost-wise, if you want to buy this Coupe Roadster in a twin 6, it's going to cost you certainly north of $500,000 if it comes out of a reputable restoration shop with a complete ground-up restoration. A Deluxe 8 Coupe Roadster is going to be somewhere north of $300,000. This car you could acquire for south of $200,000. Probably, you could get a very good example for $100,000 to $125,000. The only bad thing about this car is they're not that much cheaper to restore than the twin 6 or the Deluxe 8. So the economics of sending this car to a restoration shop sometimes aren't there. The collectability of the twin 6 is number one. If you're a serious collector, you're looking for a twin 6, and especially a model 906, the individual custom Dietrich twin 6, or one of the custom bodies. The Deluxe 8 also featured individual custom Dietrichs, the V windshield Packards. Those are extremely collectible, but again, you got to have really deep pockets to afford one of those. The standard 8 did not come with any custom bodies like a Dietrich V windshield body. It just had standard Packard production bodies. They offered about 7 or 8 different body styles for these standard 8s, and they even offered a lot more on the Deluxe 8 and the twin 6 because of the custom body line. But the cost of this car being about a third of what the twin 6 cost, they sold a lot more of these cars. They only sold about 557 twin 6s. They sold over 6,900 light 8s that year in comparison. If you like our videos, do me a favor and please like and share them. There's no money in this for us. We just do this for fun. And we would love to get your feedback on if we're doing it right. Give us a like. If we're doing it wrong, give us a comment. I read all your comments myself, and I address every single one of them myself. So we read them, we appreciate the comments, and if you want to subscribe, hit the subscribe button on our channel, and then that way every time we come out with a video, which is about once a week, you'll get a new video in your mailbox. I hope you enjoyed our test drive. I had a good time. Until next time, when we bring you the teardown of this restoration, take care.